Hey guys, Ig here. I just wanted to create a short video to show you how I go about painting my little desert attack vehicle. I'll go over the parts that I'm gonna use and paint. For the primer, I'm gonna use Vallejo black primer. Folks either love it or hate it. I've been using it for a while. This is really old bottle. It doesn't work really well in an airbrush, but for these little guys, I'm gonna use that as a brush on primer, and it works great that way. For the primary colors, I'm gonna use German gray. Any dark gray will do the trick. Another black and brown. It's just a dark color with a little warmth to it, so it's not all boring gray. For the driver and the gunner, I'm gonna use olive green and olive drab. Really, any two military green colors will do. You don't have to have those exact ones. For the highlights and dry brushing, I'm going to use Misty Gray by Reaper. Again, any gray will do. It doesn't matter if it's warm or coolish gray. You can always mix up a little bit of your base gray and it won't fix it up. For the barrels and for the guns, I'm going to use Army Painter gunmetal as a base color, and then I'm going to highlight it in a shining silver. This is an important step if you want your guns to look three-dimensional. And then the last part are washes. I'm using 4 washes. All the bare metal parts like gun barrels and things like that, I will use P3 Armor Wash. I love this stuff. It's a wash and it has some sort of metallic effect to it, so it makes things look more metallic, kind of greasy, worn out. And I'm going to use a bunch of different Army Painter quick shades. So I'm going to start with a dark tone for the deepest crevices, and I'm going to do a strong tone for medium, and then soft tone for lighter crevices. You can really use any wash that you have on hand. I've been using Vallejo and Reaper for years, and then for whatever reason I decided to try Army Painter, and I love these things. The reason being is that Army Painter washes are not separating when you water them down, and you will see later in the video I do water down my washes dramatically and apply them in multiple layers. It's this final shading. I really use them more as a glaze than as wash, and to desired effect. On miniature like this, I'm not going to do any fancy layering. It's just going to be base coat, really. Primer, base coat, touch of barrels, wheels, and then from that point on we'll just wash it until it looks cool. I don't think we'll spend more than 20 minutes plus waiting for primer to dry. Alright, so let's get started. I just want to add one more thing. First of all, I'm only using a black primer, which normally on the bigger miniatures I would use black and gray. I would start with a black, get all the deepest crevices, usually with airbrush, and then I would use gray primer on top of the black and basically use my primer as the undercoat. The second thing I want to mention is also my favorite miniature holder, painting holder. The reason why I'm using these, I don't want to go into much detail, but they fit my hand perfectly. They're glass bottoms, so they will never tip over while you're painting. I drink a lot of coffee, so I have tons of these. They fit in my hand, and when I'm painting a little detail, you will see this is big enough that I can hold it in my hand and I can brace my second hand on top of it and have really good control to hit those details. I cannot replicate that with a little tiny commercially available holders that will tip over. You can't really, when you have big ape hands like myself, that's the problem. Medicine bottles are too light unless you put a big rock on the bottom to keep it stable. There's nothing worse than knocking over your bottle and there goes your miniature that it's still drying. I think that's yeah I'll be using wet palette. just Army Painter. I have several of these different brands. I use them extensively, and I'll be using this little cheapie. I think this is probably a dollar store, but you can use anything to water down and thin down my washes. Alright, for the first step, the miniature is so tiny, I'm really going to just use old blister pack, and I'll, shake the primer pretty well, and I'm going to just drop a couple drops in a blister. If you're shaking primer, it's going to bubble up, it's going to foam. So what I would do, what I typically do, I turn it upside down, make sure it's closed, obviously, so you don't make a mess, and just tap it a couple times on a table, and then keep it upside, just level it up, pop the lid, and then take a couple drops out. So the foam should float up to the top, and you'll get just a primer instead of mess. This primer dries pretty well even when you apply it with the brush, as long you're not applying the foam. The foam might get into smaller crevices and actually dry up as a solid bubble. Happened to me on 20 millimeter miniatures around face and eyeballs in this area where there's a lot of little areas. So if you just tap the primer, it's going to be fine. And again, applying with a brush, it's not a problem. So I am going to, what I typically do with a new miniature, let me take another one here, especially with the cars, I like to start at the bottom, and I will, it's sort of two-step process, and I will take a little bit of the primer and quickly get the bottom part primed. The thing to remember here is it's a primer. You're just putting little particles on it to allow your paint to grip on. So it doesn't have to be solid black. So this is all there is to it. And I'll let that dry for a few minutes, and then I'll do the top side. So I already prepped one here, so that was the bottom side. I'm gonna put it on a holder. I'm gonna take the new guy off. What I used here is the poster tack. I find that the best, if you just gently push your miniature on top of it, it'll hold it just right amount so it doesn't pop while you're painting it. So I've already pre-painted this one, the bottom, so I'm just going to do the top part. Again, I'm not trying to be very precise here, I'm just slapping this on. I have to sort of backtrack here a little bit because this miniature has so many deep details, and I have no intention of really going in and painting all these with a tiny brush. I am going to stick these bristles deep inside and prime, probably a little bit over prime the details, because they'll just stay black and they will get no paint. Alright, that's all there is to it, and I'll be back in a minute as soon as this is dry. I want to add comment on the brushes that I use. I have to admit I'm somewhat of a brush snob. I don't like cheap brushes, and by cheap I mean stuff that you will buy at Michael's or Craft Store, Walmart, whatever. Yes, you can paint with them, but if you do any work around your car or around your house appliances, having good tools makes difference. And I'm a firm believer that you should invest in a good brushes. So this is my favorite brand, Winsor & Newton Series 3 miniature. Miniature models have a shorter bristles. The regular model, non-miniature, will have the longer bristles, which will not really benefit you when you're painting stuff like that. They're probably made more for traditional arts. When I say expensive and fancy brushes, these are really I don't know, if you go to Michael's, you'll find some synthetic, you know, made overseas, usually in China, brush for like $7-8 is going to be, you know, artificial bristle and whatnot. These are handmade in, you know, in England. They have a long tradition, you know. I had these for several years now. I abused them. I did idiotic things, dipping them into, you know, CA glue while it was still soft, and, you know, and I still have these brushes. I'm still using them, not for detailing, but, you know, for dry brushing and some, you know, things that would normally damage the bristles, and I don't want to use my new brushes. So these are about, I buy them on a Dig Blick, and they're about, you know, with the discounts, they're about $15. I really think if you have a good brushes, you will get better results, you'll enjoy hobby more, and in the long term, you will save more money. And I'm speaking out of experience because I did buy a number of cool brushes, Michael's, and, you know, you use them a couple times, the next thing you know, the bristles just go to crap. They look like, you know, the top of the airbrush brush looks like a palm tree instead of, you know, nice pointy bristles like this. This is, you know, red sable, some sort of, I don't know, giant rat weasel, and they plug these hairs out of its butt or whatever to make these fancy brushes. Anyway, this is good to go. This is not the only brand that uses red sable. Obviously, here I have another one. This is Sable Cat's Tongue by Renaissance. It's not as sharp, but I like to use this for targeted dry brushing and highlighting, especially when you have something small like this. It's the same thing. It's about $10. I think I got it at a Dig Blick. This one happens to be, I believe, made in Germany. I could be wrong. Anyway. All right, I'm gonna switch to my dry mini and we can start painting. All right, just as if with the dry brush, with the priming, I like to start by applying painting my tires first. So I'm gonna pop some of this German gray on my wet palette. I like to start at the bottom, so once that's dry, I can just go and paint the rest of the mini and leave it on a. So here I'm just looking for some sort of gray coverage here on the wheels. You don't have to be precise. I guess you don't even have to paint wheels underneath. Nobody will look at it, but, you know, in my mind, I want wheels painted, so I'll paint them both on top and on the bottom. Sorry about that. I have just a little crappy web camera here, nothing fancy, so I don't know if I'm jumping out of focus or not. Alright, I think that will do the trick. I'll let the bottom dry, then we'll put it on my miniature holder and we'll paint the top part. Alright guys, just my first blunder on my first video. Yeah, learning from pros, I guess. I managed to put paint on my wet palette without really having parchment paper on top of it. So that was extra crispy stupid, and I will correct that. And once I clean up my palette and get it ready, I'll be back so we can proceed with the paint. Alright, we got the wet palette back in order, so this time I actually have parchment paper on top of it, so we're good to go. I'm gonna just add a little bit more gray to the wheels. Again, because it's a gray primer, I mean black primer all around it, don't worry about it, you know, getting in every little detail and crevice. It's gonna look fine on this scale. That's what I like about a 6mm miniatures, you know. You can make a lot of mistakes, you can screw up a lot of detail and they'll still look great. Just the general shape and, you know, color that matters, and, you know, your brain will decide to see the pattern and to see the shape, to see what it wants to see, you know. The same philosophy I apply when I'm painting camouflage on my miniatures. it's a representation of, you know, real world camouflage. You don't want to paint your miniatures to be really camouflaged and you can't see them. Probably one of the future videos I'm going to show you some of my tanks that I painted for a Gale Force 9 tanks game, and some of them I painted realistically camouflage, and they're very difficult to look at. And then my new style of camouflage is what you see on my posts on the Facebook, like this APC. It looks good, and you know, you see the camouflage, even though in a real world application this would be not very good way to camouflage your vehicle if you want it to survive. Alright, let's go to the next step. Alright guys, I'm back. I have on a wet palette, I had two greens, olive drab and olive green. They're kind of military-ish colors. You can use really anything. I guess if these are some sort of perimeter security forces, and if you're using it with my artillery truck, I painted artillery truck in a desert color, so I would imagine this would have to be in the same scheme, but I'm just going to paint them what I have on a palette. Right now it's green, and that's what I'm going to start with. You know, it's a game, it's a Battletech or whatever you play, Horizon Wars, doesn't really matter. Whatever color you use, it's fine. I'm gonna do basic camouflage. Most reference photos that I find online, those buggies are just so dusty you can't really tell what color they are, but I would imagine they're not green if they're running in a desert. So anyway, let's get started. I will start with a darker green, load my brush very lightly, and start painting sides and all the exposed frame parts. You will notice that these paints don't stick so well to the black primer, or some paints won't, some will. It doesn't really matter, just the key is that you apply light coats. And if you just go around and you keep applying, eventually, you know, you will build up the layers and you will get your color. And as much that seems as a disadvantage, you will actually build up the layers. Your miniature will look better. You also have a chance to, as you go, you are really shading the vehicle and you're building the shade as you go. Instead of trying to wet blend or do a bunch of different layers, you're simply building it from ground up, and you know, you just focus more on the areas that you want more in color. Everything inside the vehicle, I'm just going to leave it as is. Maybe do a little bit dry brushing later on. And alright, the key here is that you load your brush properly. And what I mean properly is dip maybe 1/4 or 1/5 of the tip of the brush into the paint. So something like this. This is a dark color. I'm going to just dip a little bit on the top and I'm going to pull out, sort of roll it in, just to get a little bit. And then I'm going to back to the mini. And again, I'm just going to start now hitting the top parts, really, not even go anymore underneath. Anything that's in a shadow can just stay pretty much primer. Again, these 6mm miniatures, they're so tiny that you just want to accentuate the shape of the miniature. There's really no detail to speak of. You want to put highlights just so that your brain can decide, oh yep, that's the little dune buggy and or desert buggy, and you know, that's what I see and that's what it is. Alright, a little bit on the gunner guy here. We're going to use different color washes to make, obviously, gunner and the driver a little bit different in shades than the actual vehicle. Alright, so that's currently what we have. Alright, gonna wash the brush. And I'm gonna hit it with the first highlight. So I'm gonna take some of this lighter green and dab it a little bit in a darker green, sort of mix it in between. I like to transition between two colors, always introduce some of the old color into the mix. That way they will blend nicely and flow with each other. You might be buying or have already all sorts of triads. I think Reaper at one point was selling, probably still is, the triad colors. They're okay, but even if you're painting with a triad, it's always good to introduce dab of old color into the new one that you're gonna paint with. Alright, let's see. A little bit on the gunner, on his shoulders, on his arms. Sorry guys, my camera is really cheap, and my camera, even though it's pointing straight at my thing and my miniature on a screen, it appears to the right side. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it only was 20 bucks. Alright, and the final highlight, I'm just gonna do straight up light green, and I'm gonna hit just the frame, top of the buggy, like that. You don't even have the full lines, you want to do some variety like this, a little bit here, there, a little bit on the front, suspension posts, like that. We're gonna do final dry brush layers, so that will bring even more detail. And I always like to highlight the helmet on these little figures. Alright, that's that. I'm gonna let it dry for a couple minutes and then we'll paint the gun. Alright, we're back to paint the gun. The gun is so tiny, you really need no paint in the palette. I put some into my palette, which is probably really stupid. You can just dip your brush right into the top of the bottle and that's gonna do the trick. I have the gunmetal, it's just called gunmetal by Army Painter, metallic, and then for highlight I'm gonna use shining silver. Again, just no big fancy thing here. I'm just gonna drag it over the top like that. And I might be totally doing this wrong, but I'm gonna, this engine block that's sticking out, I'm gonna highlight a little bit in the metal just to bring that detail out. That's all there is to it. I need some sort of dark background. This camera is not really. I'll take some shots obviously once we're done painting, so you'll see better from the close. Alright, I'm gonna take some of that shining silver and just run it right on top of the barrel. Make it really pop, and a little bit on the engine. And this looks now way too silver, but we're gonna tone that down. And for that purpose we're gonna use P3. It's called Armor Wash. Again, you need such a small amount that it's probably not even worth putting it on your palette. I'm just going to grab something right out of the bottle And just like that, that shiny gun suddenly looks like a real thing. I'm gonna dab this a little bit around the engine, even a little bit on a chassis, you know, like there's oil coming out a little bit. Messy engine kind of effect. Alright. I don't know if you can see that. I really need to get better camera. Maybe the future videos will actually be decent. Okay, I'll let that dry for a second and then we'll put a first highlight on tires. Alright, for the tire highlights I'm just using Misty Gray by Reaper 09090. You can use any gray, doesn't matter warm or cold. We'll be washing some warm wash over the tires to make them look a little bit muddy. I'm adding this thing to the German gray and I'm going to highlight the tires. The key is that you really go easy. So basically this is what I get. That's the gray tire color and I'm getting some sort of medium gray. And I'm dipping a really tiny amount of paint on it. I'm almost like on a dry brush. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to start dragging it over the top of the tires just to bring the texture out like that. And the other side, a little bit more of that paint. Tires in a bright light, they're light gray. In a normal light, they're dark gray. So this is what you got. And now on the side, inside a tire, just the top part, just gently brush to give it a little bit more definition. We're going to wash all this, so if you overdo it, doesn't matter really. Alright, so that's the first highlight. Well, if you're ever posting videos on YouTube, make sure you spend more than $20 on your webcam. Alright, we're back when this dries off. Alright guys, we're back. We'll do a first highlight, not highlighted by the wash, and this is going to be with a soft tone, the lightest of three. Again, I'm using Army Painter washes despite having buckets of Vallejo and Reaper, simply because this stuff just mixes so well with the water it will not separate. Vallejo wash and Reaper wash, I used it for years, but if you put even the smallest drop on the water, it will separate and the crevices will come all chalky looking and dusty, and it's a really undesirable effect. So what I do with this, I'm going to start now. This is going to be more of a glaze than really a wash. So I'm going to start with this much wash and I'm going to add a little bit of water to it. Maybe even a little bit more. And make it really, really light. I mean, it almost looks like a dirty water from the, washing brushes. So what I do with this, I'll just go and, well, I'm going to take a bigger brush. I'm going to go and essentially paint the whole Mini. So what this does, it's not really wash, I'm just spreading it kind of thinly everywhere. It sort of connects all the colors together, blends everything in. It's not very pronounced, the effect, but trust me, it's worth the trouble. Alright, so I'm gonna turn off the camera, I'm gonna, you know, let this dry off and then apply again. And then we'll come back and do the deeper crevices and do some little bit more shading with the washes. Alright, we're back for a second round of washing. So I have the darker wash now, again thinned down, and I'm gonna just apply it in all the grooves wherever I need a little bit more contrast on the wheels, on the lower parts of the vehicle. Even on the gunner. I tried to hit the driver inside. I'm going to put a blob inside on a buggy floor because that seems to be a little bit too bright. Around engine as well. So the key here is that you really use thin down wash. Let it dry and then reapply. If you just do pure wash, it's going to get too dark. It's going to look, you know, kind of muddy. Applying thin washes, you're really glazing with a wash, so you can, you know, you have more control. If you apply 5 thin coats, it's better than applying 1 thick coat of the wash. It will, you know, unify all the colors, tie them together, and everything will look better. Alright, a little bit more here. Alright, I'll let it dry and then we'll do final wash with the dark tone by Army Painter. Okay, and this is the final wash, the darkest of 3 in the deepest crevices. Mini is pretty much as good as you will get. I will just do one more highlight dry brush on top of this and I might call it complete. The headlights, I would imagine this is some sort of desert buggy. The headlights will be muted, either dark or they will have just a slit, so I might just leave them dark or put some wash in it. Otherwise, I think this is good to go. I mean, this thing is so tiny. I don't think there's any point of trying to pull any more details out of it. Okay, and we have a final highlight that was done by mixing Misty Gray and my lighter green, and I'm using a big honking artist brush like this. Just typical dry brushing, dip it in, wipe it off, most of it, and then gently pull under the, you know, 45-degree angle over all the sharp corners, just to bring that tiny little amount of highlight on the very edges. The only other thing from this point on that you could do is take the lightest of the wash and one more time sort of glaze over the whole miniature, and that will just give you, again, will connect all these different shades into a nice flowing. There you go. Alright, something like that. I'll let it dry and then I'm gonna take some static pictures and we'll be posting that tonight on the Facebook. Alright, thank you all.